Hello everyone, and welcome to the another video on measuring scope 3 GHG emissions. In the previous video, I have gone through all most of the terms that are being used throughout the guidance, and I have discussed a very brief about those terms. But in this video, let's talk more about the introduction of this guidance, which is the Scope 3 GHG measurement and reporting protocols for food and drink sectors, basically in UK. Let's talk about why this guidance is so important, what is the purpose of this guidance, and why a company or a food and drink sector should adopt this guidance for calculating GHG emissions for Scope 3. So there are a few key points that I would like to take you through. The first key point is basically the use of this document is voluntary. So it is not something that a very mandatory guidance that everyone has to follow, but it is a kind of voluntary guidance or document. But the matter of this guidance is basically agreed by the UK food and drink sectors and the standards basically. So this is not something that everyone has to follow, but it is basically a good guidance that everyone should follow. And the other thing is basically it is not intended for directly use by the primary producers. So maybe like in a supply chain of food and drink sector, there would be some primary producers of something. So this is not something that primary producers would adopt, but this is something that on a business level or an organization level, this guidance would be good. So if someone has a business in UK related to the food and drink sector, so they can basically adopt this guidance for measuring scope 3 emission. But on a primary producers level, this guidance is not acceptable. Also, this guidance basically refers, or I would say meet a pre-requirement of existing guidances. So those are basically the GHG protocol corporate value chain, the GHG new protocol for land sector and renewable guidance, which is basically a part or issued by the SBTi, the Science-Based Targets Initiatives, or also the Science-Based Target Initiatives corporate net zero standard and new guidance on setting forest, land and agriculture target, which is also known as flag guidance. So if you are adopting this guidance, so you are also fulfilling the criteria for flag as well, and the gold standard value chain intervention. So these are the four guidance, those are already there. So if you are adopting this scope 3 GHG measurement and reporting protocols of food and drink sector, basically you are fulfilling the requirements of these four protocols as well. So when we talk about scope 1, scope 3 or scope 2 emission, what exactly are they? How do we define like this emission would come under the scope 1, scope 2 or scope 3 emissions? So there is a small chart that or a diagram or a graph that gives a bit of definition about scope 1 emissions, 2 and 3 emissions. So if we talk about scope 1 emissions, so the scope 1 emissions are basically the direct emissions that come from the organization or I would say the control source. So it can be related to the company facilities or the vehicle or the amount of electricity that are being used inside the facility. So whatever emission those comes from within the organization, or I would say those are a part of organization, basically comes under the scope 1 emissions. Whereas where the organization or a company has control to reduce or to accelerate those emissions. So whatever comes under the control of organization, that comes under the scope 1 emissions. Whereas the scope 2 emissions are basically the indirect emissions from the generation of purchased energy, or I would say the emissions that are not a part of organization, but the emissions are coming through the organization. So for example, there is a food industry or maybe a retailer based in UK, is purchasing some kind of electricity that is can be renewables or non-renewable. So basically, the organization is not generating energy, but also the organization is basically purchasing the energy from outside the organization. But the energy is being used inside the organization, so that would come under the scope 2 emission. So the company has no control over that, but still it can impact or can affect the final impacts that come from the organization. So whatever that comes outside the organization, but it still affect the organization final impacts would come under the scope 2 emissions. Whereas the scope 3 emissions are the kind of emission where the organization has no control, and basically I would say these emissions comes through the supply chain of that organization. So maybe a food industry may be producing 1,000 of product, but those like the raw ingredients are not basically being manufactured inside the organization. So what they do, they basically source those ingredients outside the organization, and basically that organization has no control over that. Maybe a company that makes soy protein isolate, maybe they source the soybean from China, and the protein isolate is being manufactured in somewhere in the UK. So basically that country has no control over the China. Maybe they can use any kind of fertilizer, they can use any kind of pesticide to grow their soybean. But like those soybean that are being grown in China somehow impacting the final impacts of that organization. So whatever comes from the upstream and the downstream emissions, or I would say the emissions that come from upstream and the downstream processes are related to the scope 3 emissions. It is the downstream emissions or the downstream activities emission would be like if it's a distribution of that product from China to UK, or the end of life treatment of that product. Maybe that companies which is sourcing the soybean from China to UK, there would be some kind of packaging involved. So UK, like once it comes into the UK or into the facilities, they use the soybean, but there would be still some kind of packaging which will left there. So like what is happening with that packaging, whether that packaging is being used as a landfills, or maybe it is recycled, what exactly is happening with that, and how we are using that sold product. Maybe like here in UK, it is being sold as a to make this soy protein isolate, but maybe some other area maybe it is not being used as a like to make the soy protein isolate. Maybe they are using it directly inside the some kind of recipe, or maybe they are making some kind of other product. So like all those activities, or like all those emissions that will come from those activities would come under the downstream activities emissions. So when you are measuring the scope 3 emission, you have to be very clear about what would be your upstream activities and what would be your downstream activities. Note it down, think about that, how we are going to proceed with that. Let's talk about the sources of GHG emissions. As I have already mentioned earlier, that there are 6 different types of gases that comes under the greenhouse gases, and in which the major one is carbon dioxide, where the whole world is focusing on right now. So what could be the possible source for emitting carbon dioxide for food and drink sectors? So when we talk about food and drink sectors, so first we need to think about the farming of that particular products, and the packaging, then processing, then retail and the transport. But the one thing which is very common throughout the stages, that is energy. Each stage requires some kind of energy, and that energy basically can be from non-renewable sources. So higher the amount of energy required, the higher would be the emissions or the carbon emissions. So if a processing is very energy extensive, that means it requires more energy. And if it is more, if the process requires more energy, then definitely the emissions would be higher. So the first possible source would be from fossil fuels. The other one, as I have already talked about earlier, which is land use changes. So whenever we change the land for farming, or to set up a building there, or to set up a manufacturing unit there, that basically removes some kind of some amount of carbon dioxide from lands, and which is basically goes inside the atmosphere and creates the problems like climate change. Also, we can say like that the land is being used for the livestock feed, or for the farming, for producing the ingredient of those feeds basically. produces a lot of carbon dioxide. The other one is basically the application of some urea and lime. So urea and lime basically emit CO3 and CaCO3. So when we use urea and lime for farming, basically, that degrades inside the soil and produce a lot of carbon dioxide into the nature. So these are the possible sources that produce carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The other one is basically methane. Methane is one of the most dangerous gas in greenhouse gases category. And the possible sources of methane is livestock rearing. So whenever we do the livestock farming and the enteric fermentation that happens inside that, the stomach of those livestock basically produces methane inside the nature. The other one is basically rice cultivation. Rice cultivation produces a lot of methane inside in nature, and the aquaculture is same. Aquaculture produces a lot of methane in nature, and the same for the landfills and the land management, basically for vehicle and fertilizer production. So like all these activities produces some amount of methane, which has like more severity or like is more severe than carbon dioxide. The other one is nitrous oxide. Nitrous oxide basically comes from forest and residue burning. So when we burn some kind of residue that remains on the ground after farming, that produces a lot of nitrous oxide, and which causes the climate change. The other one is basically the cultivation of drained organic soil. Fertilizers is basically one of the major reasons behind the nitrous oxide, because that contain nitrogen as a main nutrient. So whenever we use high amount of fertilizer, we see that that nitrous oxide is being released into the environment. The manure management same, because that contains nitrogenous compound, and it produces nitrous oxide there. And the wastewater and the land management as well. So land management basically is responsible for all different kind of emissions, wherein it is a carbon dioxide, methane, and the nitrous oxide. The other GHG gas is basically hydrofluorocarbons, which does not come through any kind of processing, that it's just that comes under the food and drink sectors. But hydrofluorocarbons is basically comes from the air conditioning or the refrigeration then being used to store the food, to store that food and drinks, or the air conditioning that which is being used inside the organization facility. So that produces hydrofluorocarbons. So these are the two things which are basically responsible for the emission of hydrofluorocarbons. With these three gases, the fluorocarbon, sulfur hexafluoride, and nitrogen difluoride, these are not related to the food and drink value chains. But if we are measuring the structural emissions for some other industries like mining or the vehicle industry or automobile industry, so if we are measuring the impacts of those industries, then we will definitely see that these kind of gases are also responsible, or like these kind of gases are also emitting into the nature. So overall, like four gases that are involved for food and drink sectors are the carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and the hydrofluorocarbons. Let's talk about upstream and downstream emission profile, and it is totally depend on what kind of business you are doing and what kind of business is involved in your supply chain. So if the system boundaries that you have considered is created to hospitality grade or created to grade, so the upstream and the downstream emissions would differ in both cases. So if you are using created to grade with the system boundary, so the upstream ingredient would be whatever comes before the disposal would all come under the upstream emissions, and whatever comes after the disposal would come under the downstream emission. Whereas like we do not consider whatever happens after the disposal. So in the case of created to grade, the upstream emissions would only be considered. Whereas for the related to hospitality gate, so if you are producing a food or if you are making a food, so whatever comes before the preparation of that food would come under the upstream ingredient, and the disposable part of that food would come under the downstream emissions. And same for the gradient to retail. So whatever is happening before the retail would be the upstream ingredient, and what is happening after the retail would be the downstream emission. So this is how you can use your system boundaries, and how this is how you can basically evaluate your downstream and upstream emissions on the basis of the kind of system boundary that you are using. Let's talk about some limits of this GHG emissions, this report or the guidance. So the first limit of this guidance is that this document is only focused on GHG emissions. So if you are considering some other kind of social and environmental emissions or the impact, you can't evaluate or you can't measure those impacts with the help of this guidance. So this guidance is basically more related to the GHG emissions only. So if you are more interested in environmental, like other environmental impacts or some social impacts, so you can go and choose some other kind of guidance. But if you are adopting this guidance, so this guidance is only related to the GHG emissions. The other limit of this protocol is basically because it also does not advance or contribute to the methodological discussion of product level GHG measurement, which means if you are focusing on basically measuring the emissions of a product, so you cannot rely on this protocol, because this protocol is more related to the overall organizational emission. This protocol does not support you to measure a product-based emissions. So if you are related to, if you are more interested to measure the emissions of a single product, so in that case, you can go with the PEF guidance, or you can choose some other types of methodology or protocols. But this protocol is basically more focused on the organizational level emissions. So these are the two limits of these protocols. So if you come under these two kind of scenarios, so we cannot use this protocol. But if you are going to assess or measure and organizational level emission, then this report would definitely help you to measure those emission. And one more limit that I would like to add here is basically if you have a business that comes outside the food and drink sector, so you cannot use this guidance as a supporting guidance to use or to measure the GHG emissions. So these are the three basic limits of these protocols. And if you have any questions, you can ask me anytime in comment section, and just let me know if you have any question so I can answer this.